Would you go?
Hi there, good afternoon everybody in Europe, good morning if you're in the Americas, good evening if you're in Asia Pacific, and if you're listening to a recording, whatever time of the day it is, whatever time zone you're in, I hope you're well and thanks very much for joining us. My name is Martin Cowan, I'm contributing editor for T News. I'll be moderating today's webinar, which is brought to you in association with WorldPay. I've got my colleague Nick Vivian helping out in the background. And we've got another great webinar lined up for you today, continuing our deep dive into all things payments. This one, as you can see from the screen in front of you, headlined 5 things a travel or airline CFO needs to know about payments. It's quite self-explanatory while being quite broad at the same time. We've got a couple of great speakers for you. Thomas Heldorf, Vice President of Travel and Airlines Vertical Growth at WorldPay, who is a veritable veteran of T News webinars. And we've got Ilko Dettingmeier, his colleague, Senior Business Development Manager, who's making his T News webinar debut. So that's the two guys introduced. Before I pass it over to Thomas to kick off proceedings, just a couple of small housekeeping points. We actively encourage these webinars to be as interactive as possible. So on the right-hand screen, there's a box, a GoToWebinar dashboard, which has got a conveniently titled box saying questions, which if you want to ask any questions of the panelists, if you want any of the stats or methodology clarifying them, please sort of key in the questions to that box and we'll try and get round to asking the panelists the questions at the end. There'll be a Q&A, which I should have mentioned earlier. And another thing that I need to mention is that this webinar is being recorded. So you'll get an email from GoToWebinar tomorrow, which will have a link through to the recording. The recording will also feature the slides, and that link you can share with your family, friends, and colleagues. If you can't wait that long, the links will be live on T News within 2 hours or so of the webinar ending. Okay, well, that's it from me for now. I'll be back later to oversee the Q&A, and I might be chipping into the presentations as well. But for now, I'll leave you in the capable hands of Thomas Heldorf. Thomas, over to you.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be back here with T News. Yeah, as you said, it's my second or third webinar here. My name is Thomas Heldorf. I'm the Vice President for Airlines and Travel here at WorldPay. I've been looking after the airline and travel strategy for the last 4 years now. And together with me here today is Ilko from Amsterdam.
Hello. Ilko. Sorry, Thomas.
Ilko, to you, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Ilko Dettingmeier calling in from the Amsterdam office, Senior Business Development Manager for WorldPay, looking after the EMEA region, and yeah, I've been with WorldPay for 5 years, and this is my first time in a T News webinar. So welcome, everybody.
Good. So the topic that we have chosen for you today is an essence of many conversations that I had with CFOs from travel companies, from airlines, from ground transportation companies around the world. And it typically starts with, Thomas, how can you save me money? How can you make my life as a CFO better? But that quickly moves on to conversations more about optimizing. How can he optimize his organization to reduce his costs, but not only that, to improve acceptance rate, to improve the user experience? What are the challenges out there? What are the opportunities out there? And if you're not a CFO, hopefully this webinar will give you some clues and hints where to start looking over the next couple of weeks and months. What you can do about your payment setup to please the CFO. And if you are a CFO on this call, then hopefully this will give you some hints where to look for not only cost savings, but also optimization opportunities and costs, but as well as challenges and the opportunities that are out there in the market. So it's a quick summary of the 5 most important things I think that you all should be aware of when it comes to payments. Before we get going, just a very brief introduction to WorldPay. For those of you who don't know us, we are the world's leading acquirer, and our portfolio covers probably every aspect of a payment life cycle that you as a travel or airline organization would need. It covers fraud, gateway, all sorts of alternative payment methods on top of the regular card. And of course, we do acquiring. On a busy day, we fill something like an A380 every second. It kind of totals up to 15 billion transactions a year. And we love the airline and travel space. We're working with more than 80 airlines around the world and some of the leading travel companies, and as I mentioned, cruise companies, bus companies, rail, hotel companies, and of course, travel marketplaces. So let's dive in. Number one. And let's start at home. Let's start with what you're most likely to be able to control yourself. And that's the online payment journey. I guess if I ask you, most of you would have looked into optimizing your booking funnel from inspiration, how do you get as many customers, to your website, how do you get them through that booking flow, and how do you get them to that infamous payment button. We have looked at the actual payment element of that journey. And it's a lot more than just a payment page. We've actually identified 7 stages in that whole journey that you could look into, that you could optimize to not only increase acceptance, but also potentially reduce your costs. Let's just quickly go through those 7 steps. The first one is your homepage. And think about any touristy area that you have been in the last couple of months and years, when you see big signs in a shopping window saying, we accept a UnionPay, enticing Chinese customers into your shop. A similar thing should happen on your website, especially in countries where credit cards are not the most prevalent form of payment. Ensure that your customers know upfront that you'll be able to transact with them. Ensure that it's worthwhile for them to go through the booking funnel because they will be able to pay at the end of the funnel. Second step is security logos. You can see there at the bottom of the screen. You'd be surprised how many people feel more confident if they see such logos on the screen, especially around the payment page. And it goes to the extent that some travel companies I've seen, they make up their own security logos. They say, whatever travel agency, security approved. Just to reiterate, their data is safe. You're good to leave us with your credit card details. And an additional one is the chat button up there on the right side, right next to that. If you do have questions, if you do need help, especially around that stage, help them. Be prepared to answer questions. The next slide is an interesting one if you have a lot of recurring customers. If customers come back to you very often, it's particularly interesting for ground transportation or for anywhere where you have frequent travelers. Do save your traveler's card details for future payments. It makes the user experience so much better. It makes your website much more sticky. Think about what's the main thing that makes people go to an Amazon website. It's the easiness of payment. It's that invisible payment experience. And again, there's many things that you can do on a website is to optimize the card entry, ensure that you don't have to select what payment method it is. You can work it out. Pre-fill card numbers pre-fill the name, first name and last name that you get from the itinerary, from the lead passenger into the name and card of that data entry screen. Ensure that the expiry date is in the future. All these things can help you to reduce errors, because errors, if something occurs like that, people do tend to not come back. And when an error message happens, be a bit more specific than what you see there on the page. Don't just say, sorry, it didn't work, come back later. You can be a bit more helpful. Depending on the response code that you get from your payment service provider, from your gateway, from your acquirer, you can vary your reply. So if it's a fraudulent card, where it's clearly somebody's trying to misuse your system, empty the shopping basket and try to make it as hard for them as possible to come back. But if it's just a soft decline saying there's not enough funds on the account, or the card data are incorrect, try to get him to re-enter the card information. Maybe store his basket for like 10 minutes and allow him to go back to his bank and fill up his bank account again. or offer alternative payment methods such as a Klarna or other installment products where people can pay over several months rather than paying upfront for the transaction. So do help that basket recovery. It really, really helps to drive a total conversion. And yeah, do not give away too much to fraudsters. So there's always a balance that you have to draw a line, but do be a bit more specific on your response code. And then offer help, especially around the payment process. As we've mentioned before, there's multiple places where you can offer explanation around payment methods, especially when they involve a redirect somewhere else. Ensure that the customers know what to do with the different payment methods. So here's an example of a cartoon character that helps explain the different ones. Don't necessarily have to go that far, but a chat window or update your frequent questions and answers. And also enable your back office staff, your call center agents, to be able to answer payment-related questions. If a transaction doesn't go through, enable them to send out an SMS or a link in an email for a passenger or a customer to complete that booking. There's a lot to be made and a lot of money to be saved and a lot of conversions need to be increased if you do optimize that payment journey. Let's move on to our first polling question. Have you considered optimizing the payment page for your mobile devices? Probably many of you have thought about it, if not done already, for your website. But have you gone that next step? Have you considered that for your mobile devices?
Okay, everybody, it's Martin here. So sorry about that slight hiccup. So should be fairly straightforward. There's 4 responses there. To what extent has your business optimized its payment page for mobile? Good idea. We'll look into it. We're already thinking about it. The project is already in motion and done. So I think Nick's overseeing it. He'll probably bring the results up when we've got to a statistically significant proportion of you responding. I'm probably imagining that most people are working on payments. I'm not on optimizing their payment page for mobile. Any ideas, Thomas? Oh, here we go. We've got the answers, maybe.
Yes,
Okay.
So I guess most of you are already thinking about it or do have a project in motion. Yes. Ilko, what do you think? So Ilko, you're in touch with a lot of our customers in a lot of those discussions. Where do you see our customer base and what experiences that do you have? Do you think that's a representative example? And by the way, well done to the 30%, 33% who have done it already.
Yeah, I think it's quite an even split between people thinking about it, either doing it or completed it, and that's also a fair representation of most of the conversations I'm having. And of course, there's an obvious difference between, let's say, a flagship carrier airline or an OTA, which started out from let's say more of a digital business. So because the audience today is also in the travel and airline sector, I would say that probably justifies a portion of this split. But for me, I think this is a good representation of most of the discussions I'm having, and typically something, especially in the thinking stage, where a company like WorldPay can also add value, because we have seen many use cases also in other verticals like our digital customers, where everything has moved towards mobile.
Yeah, and if you're interested in the mobile and the online payment journey, we have launched that research 2 years ago, and we're now actually at the moment doing a research about the mobile payment journey. So watch out for that. It will come out in the beginning of next year, where we analyze the same path and try to find out what you can do on that mobile payment journey. Let's move on to the next one. Mobile is not the only channel that needs to be optimized. If you think about it, there's a lot more touch points in the travel experience where you can interact with your customers and where you can upsell and cross-sell your products. So a lot of travelers are taking their mobile phones along, which gives you the opportunity to interact them not only when they book the travel experience or when they start the travel, but also in resort. If you're an airline, you will have seen the development of kiosks turning away from just being self-service kiosks to get a check-in done or to register your bag and self-tag your bag. They're now moving to become distribution channels for yourself. So in the future, you'll be able to very safely with a chip and PIN device be able to sell upgrades, extra legroom, food, and any other ancillary services and products on those airline kiosks. So both Amadeus and SITA have launched these kind of initiatives, and of course we're supporting them in that global rollout. On board, so Wi-Fi that is now more and more available throughout the next generation of fleets will enable to bring that shopping experience and that interaction with your customers into the cabin. So kind of the perfect retail environment where you've locked in your shoppers for 2 hours and they're bored. And why not offer them destination content? Why not offer them ground transportation when they arrive? Why not offer them theater tickets and so on? So all this will be possible with Wi-Fi and especially with secure EMV payments on board, which can be contactless, or of course even online authorizations for high-value transactions. But that's not the last one. And you've probably all heard about social media payments and Twitter payments were just the beginning. But we see a lot of other initiatives and wallets and platforms that now not only allow and offer virtual travel assistants, but they allow you to buy through those assistants. Just imagine you're sitting in a taxi and you get into the airport and it's getting later and later, and your mobile phone sends you, or you receive a text message on your mobile phone saying, would you like to purchase a fast track pass because you're late? And then you have to get out and enter all your card details again. And by the time you have entered that, you're completely frustrated and you'd rather run for the security, the normal channel. But would it be much nicer if that message just popped up and would say, just slide your finger and it will buy that fast track pass for you. So we're getting into a world where travel assistants are becoming autonomous and they will come up with propositions by themselves, and you'll be able as a passenger just to say, yes please, want to have it. Similar to an Amazon, just you swipe, or if you download a song from any of your mobile operators. We've done a survey recently, and more passengers are actually willing to allow their virtual assistant to book entertainment while on holiday on their behalf. So do keep that channel in mind and ensure that your payment experience starts to be synchronized across all these channels, because your passengers will expect it. So just again, to reiterate, point number 2, ensure that the payment experience is consistent, not only for your website, not only for mobile, but all these other additional channels that are coming up in the very near future. Let's see how and what you would be doing as an organization. Are you already looking to sell beyond the initial booking? Are you engaging with the customer through its journey to sell more of your services in more occasions?
Yeah, I mean, an interesting question here. Is it's the extent to which travel companies, upsell to the customer once they've made that initial booking, and I think it's called the pre-trip upsell. So I mean, there's all sorts of things that having booked the flight and the hotel that passengers, travelers, customers are interested in buying. I mean, I'm just interested to find out how many people out there are actually sort of proactively engaging with their customers in that pre-trip stage. I'd like to think it's probably a lot of them, but I'm inclined to think that probably not.
Let's see.
We'll see. Let's see.
Oh, yeah,
Wrong
great.
again.
Already doing that. So if you are the CFO and you're not doing it, this is where a huge opportunity lies. And I guess the crucial point from a payment perspective is that user experience. So if you store your payment credentials, and if you think about an Uber experience where you just basically get on the taxi and you get off and it is being paid, just imagine that scenario. You run through fast track security and it's just paid because there's an account at the back of it. And we believe that payment experience can be a crucial element in helping to enrich that experience and make that a one-click experience. Ilko, do you see customers that you're working with that are heavily engaged with these cross-sell along the journey?
Yeah, Thomas, I think that the vast majority of airlines and online travel agencies are actually doing this. And of course at different levels. It's very common nowadays that just after you completed the booking, you get a set of additional services to buy, not only insurances but also seat upgrades, rental cars. And whilst initially this was very much a play of the low-cost carriers, I think this is spreading out more and more throughout the industry. And in addition to that, you also see some of the premium services, so lounge access, indeed fast track. Those are typically services that are being offered after the initial booking or initial purchase. And like you said, this can be made very frictionless by using certain storage or tokenization technologies.
Martin, I guess it's also a common theme in news in general, the whole on selling ancillary services and how all those aggregators are trying to cover the globe to offer those components to larger travel organizations.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we look at quite often on T News is the way in which that once the booking has been made, then there are the opportunities there for sort of upselling, and there's so many sort of buzzwords that can be applied to that. So it's personalization. There's no point if I'm booking a flight to Berlin. There's no point in offering me tickets to the Rijksmuseum. So on the simplest of levels, the upsell that you do before trip, after booking has to be targeted. And I think from my own personal experience, I think if the payment process is straightforward, then I'm more inclined to make that pre-trip purchase. If I have to go back in and put in all my details again, by the time I've done that, I'm bored and my attention span is gone. So I certainly think that there's a great potential in there. And just sort of the slides, I mean, I was wrong, but there's still sort of a third of companies aren't or aren't yet doing that. So there's still a whole bunch of money on the table for quite a lot of travel companies, which is good for all concerned. So yeah, sure.
Good. So let's move on to the next point. It's PSD2. It's the Permanent Payment Service Directive 2. It will regulate all payment transactions in the European Union and in the European Economic Area. And it will also regulate your payment transactions. It will regulate all transactions that are either initiated by a merchant within that area or bought by a customer from that area. So it will certainly affect your businesses from two areas. One of them, first one is and what they promote is competition in the payment space. For example, it will allow access to payment accounts for companies that want to initiate payments on behalf of their customers. So it's called a payment initiation service provider, and this will allow online account holders to pay via bank transfers rather than credit card transactions. So it will bypass regular card schemes, and the impact that will have on you, or the likely impact, is that more and more people will use those bank transfer methods, and it will be cheaper, most likely. The other aim of that Payment Service Directive is an increase in security, and that will certainly reduce fraud, but it will certainly also have an impact on the user experience. And the important component there is the strong customer authentication for all electronic payments, which means that all of your transactions will have to be approved with two factors, or a cardholder has to use two factors to authorize a transaction out of three that are available. One is what he knows, so it's his PIN or password. One factor or component is what he has, so either his card or his phone. And the third component that can be used to authenticate a transaction is what he is, so either his fingerprint or his voice, to voice recognition. So basically, all of your transactions, if you either transact in out of Europe or if you have European customers, will have to be authenticated and basically authorized with two steps. And that, of course, has a significant impact on the user experience that we just discussed first. So ideally, your customers don't have to even see the transaction. Now, regulations want those transactions to be safer for the cardholders and safer for the organizations. And they want to impose very onerous transaction authentication steps. The final draft of the proposal has come out. It has not been ratified yet. So we don't really know yet. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market how that's going to play out. And there will be exclusions. So, for example, the latest draft has exclusion for contactless transactions below 30 or 50 euros. But there will be hopefully more exclusion by the time we know how the countries will implement those proposals. There will be hopefully further exclusions based on the risk, on the amount, on the recurrence of the transactions, and on the trust. But until it has been fully implemented, we still don't know yet as an industry how this is going to work out. And it's going to be enforced, especially this strong customer authentication process. It will be enforced probably by August 2019. So it's still a long way to find out how it is actually going to work out. The one point that is pretty much clear is about surcharging. So there will be rules and regulations about how much and if you can surcharge a customer. Again, those rules haven't been yet implemented into domestic law in all the countries. So this has to happen by the 13th of January 2018. By then, we will know how this is going to look like, and it will, if you're a CFO, certainly impact your revenue line if today you're relying on surcharging. So keep an eye on the legislation and do talk to your legal advisors about where and where not you'll be able to surcharge once the rules have really been defined and it's all clear. One thing doesn't change if you are today using the commercial agent exclusion for your marketplace or for e-commerce platform, so that you don't have to be regulated as payment institution when you handle your customers' money. That exclusion is staying. So if you're acting either on behalf of a buyer or a seller, you will still be able to fall under that commercial agent exclusion. Again, talk to your legal advisor to ensure that you're on the safe side, whether you have to change your T's and C's, or indeed whether you really have to apply for a payment institution license. A topic that has to be looked into, don't ignore it. The first tranche of that law is going to be in effect on the 13th of January. So ensure that you know where you're standing with your organization. That was it for number 3. Number 4, it will brings us into how you will get paid by 2021. We've only just recently launched our global payment report. It's going to come out very soon. And I want to share with you 2 highlights of that. The first one is about m-commerce and the increase of m-commerce. We've talked a lot about it before, that more and more of customers and your passengers are willing to commit and transact on a mobile phone. They not only use it for inspiration and browse, but they actually buy on the mobile phone. And we've seen a general trend in e-commerce spend to go up in the UK to 23% and in the US to 26%. Now, if you're only selling those 2 markets, you may think, yeah, that's not really a lot and not really relevant. If you think about other countries, if you think about Asia, if you think about Africa, it's massive. So if you are thinking about selling into these markets, ensure that you have a really, really strong mobile strategy. A lot of the customers that I'm talking to from this region, they go mobile first. That's what they do. We've seen a leapfrog of technology there. For a lot of the passengers, a lot of the travelers, mobile phone is their only access point to the internet. They do not have desktops as much as we would typically have in the UK and in the US, and even more so in Africa. Ilko, do you have experience with that from our customer base? I mean, you're looking after the EMEA region, which includes Africa. What do you see there out in the field?
Yeah, exactly. You already give a good representation with this chart, but indeed, countries like Nigeria, where the leapfrog effect was very strong, people went straight to internet-enabled mobile devices. You also see that most of the payment methods are actually not mobile-centric, but mobile-only. So a lot of the payment methods that are enabled and that are leading the charts in countries like Nigeria are fully focused on mobile, and that's also the demand we see from a lot of our customers. On the other hand, of course, in the airline industry, with a lot of high value transaction, high ticket value transactions, it can be quite challenging with some of those payment methods. So speaking to your payment provider on this I think is crucial.
So you've mentioned the payment method. Sorry, Martin?
I think that was just a ghost in the machine. I wasn't...
Okay. So Ilko, you've mentioned payment methods that are related to mobile phones. And one of the trends that we have seen already in last year, but it's actually even stronger this year, is the growth of e-wallets. And predominantly driven out of Asia, WeChat Pay, Alipay, these are the main drivers, and that wave is certainly going to come over to Europe. And we've seen Google launching their payment methods. We have Apple Pay, we have Android Pay, Samsung Pay. These wallets are just going to keep increasing their relevance in the payment mix. So if you are in particularly targeting Asia, if you're particularly targeting the younger generation, the mobile generation really, ensure that you're catered for that new wave of payment methods. Yes, there is growth in credit cards. Yes, there is growth in bank transfers, and this is taking away the cash component. So they're both still growing, but not as much as the wallets. And in effect, if you add all these alternative payment methods together, last year was the first year when we saw more transactions in the e-commerce world and m-commerce world done with non-credit cards than actually with credit cards. So alternative payment methods are not really alternative anymore. Consider them as very, very, very important payment methods, and they should be included in your mix, and again, ensure that they're working on all the different channels.
Sorry, Thomas, can I just ask, sorry,
Yeah.
why do you think e-wallets are going to grow so spectacularly over the next 4 or 5 years? Is it just the sort of simplicity of use, or is there a sort of branding thing going on? It's cool to use Apple Pay.
Absolutely, that the usage is a main component. That user experience that you have if you have a wallet and the card details stored in that wallet, it enables that one-click experience. There is one way of doing it if the merchant, if the travel agent drives the one-click experience because they store the card details. The other approach is to store your card details into one of those wallets. And the other trend that we see is that whole retail and commerce platforms evolve, like the whole Alipay world and WeChat Pay world. It becomes more than just a social media channel. It becomes a whole commerce platform with its own payment method. So it's almost an entire ecosystem that brings along its own way of paying. And if you want to play in that ecosystem, you need to be able to accept those payment methods. So as these ecosystems grow, and there is more and more of those ecosystems coming out, and I guess all of these large retail platforms will start to have their own payment methods. And again, if you want to participate, keep that in mind and ensure that wherever you want to play, that your customers are able to pay. Could you want to add anything else?
No, I think this covers it really well, Thomas. Thanks.
Good. That brings us to our next question. You yourself, as a consumer, would you book travel on your mobile phone? Let's just see how the audience is perceiving that proposition.
Yeah, again, this will be an interesting one because the T News readership is informed and educated, so I'd be quite interested to see the extent to which the T News readership is booking travel on its mobile phone. I don't know if I regularly do. I often do. Certainly not always, and certainly not never. So I'd probably be, and I've tried it. Be interesting again to see how that pans out.
Yeah, interesting one. a nice split. A lot of you are probably more than half, even some 70% are actually has done it or regularly do it, and the share between those two is pretty even. And the quarter of you has never tried it. It is probably a good amount of people who are doing it. Probably a lot more than we have seen in the previous charts. It would be in particular interesting if you would be interesting to see where the audience is coming from in terms of region. But I guess it's heavily US and European focus, which is quite surprising. Yeah, the average user is certainly not as advanced as the regular users of those services as you are in the audience. But it just shows that you as a travel provider probably are using your own services, at least that as well. Ilko, any thoughts on the results?
Yeah, what pops into my mind is what probably is driving this for a large portion is the app-based travel industry. So you already mentioned the likes of Uber, but there are more and more competitors to Uber coming onto the market, and that's typically everything is app-based from signing up to the frictionless payments. So people who use that, they are by default booking their travel on their mobile phone. So I think that's probably a large driver. And then linking back to one of the previous points on ancillary services, upselling, I think that's also a channel that's been heavily explored at the moment by different companies, by OTAs and airlines, where we see a push towards mobile payments as well.
Just looking at some of the questions from the audience, one comment was that, or one question rather was why we see less usage of wallets across Europe and the US, and I guess it's not only to do with what people like, but what people have access to. So whilst in the UK especially, and in the US, access to credit cards is quite a common thing, and people do generally have credit cards. In a lot of countries in Europe, but in particularly in Asia, people just don't have access to credit cards as widely as in the UK and in the US. So it's also a cultural thing, and it's just what is available to people to use. So it's not only the convenience, but it's basically just what payment methods have evolved around the world and how fast have they evolved. One good example is China UnionPay. Whilst UnionPay is probably the largest card scheme in the world, the airline industry hasn't really adopted to that, and it's not really available through the BSP process. IATA was the code is already available, and the IATA standards say that you could use the card. It's just not in use because the systems that have been built some 60 years ago, they haven't been adopted yet to use even something like the largest card scheme in terms of card numbers, which is UnionPay. So it's not only a cultural thing, but it's also what's available to people, and young people especially. Some of our research shows that they don't even like credit, so they actually prefer to have direct banking applications where they can do push payments from the bank account. Good. Let's move on to our last topic number 5. And that topic brings us back to your home turf again. We've before talked about what you can do to optimize the payment experience. So to do everything you can do for a customer to push that payment button. Our last section 5, is going to be about what you can do in the background to ensure that as many of those transactions turn into good revenue. And there's 3 aspects that you can play with and that you can optimize. And the first one we have touched before, it's the risk component. So obviously there's a constant balancing act between how much risk do you accept and how good and safe do you keep your business and try to turn down fraudsters, but at the same time you may turn down too many good transactions, so the false positives, how we call them. So of course the tighter you have your fraud rules, the more good customers you'll likely turn away. Now artificial intelligence and machine learning and all these things, they are here to help, and they will continue to improve that decision-making process. But again, it's a component that you, to some extent, have under control. Is how much risk do you allow within your business? The 2 other components are costs, and I'm talking here mostly about payment costs and acceptance rates, and they are tied together. Interestingly enough. It really depends on your setup. So to give you an example, as an international online travel agent, you can decide to take payments all into a single country. You can say, for all my global traffic, I use one local acquiring bank here in London, to give you an example, to acquire all these transactions from around the world. Now this, whilst it is very simple, because you only have one bank that you need to work with, it's very simple and easy to do, but it's probably the most expensive in terms of transaction costs, because you do route transactions internationally, and international transactions and interregional transactions, they incur a higher cost than a domestic local transaction. Now the other extreme will be you go country by country and you set yourself up with a local bank country by country. Now that is likely to reduce the cost because you can get local processing rates, and it's also in some cases likely to increase your acceptance rate because local banks are more likely to approve local transactions for the local cardholders, but your complexity is going up a lot, because you would have to set up a bank account and an office in every one of those countries that you would like to have a domestic banking relationship. Now, global companies like WorldPay, they can help you to kind of take the best out of both worlds because of our number of licenses in the many countries that we have and the many acquiring partners that we work with. So we can give you kind of a good mix of all of those options. So you can be local in as many countries as you want to be local, but you get the central reporting and the having only one relationship on the other side. But it still leaves you up to choose where you want to have a local representation, where you want to have a local office to get better acceptance rates, and where you'd rather have all the transactions pooled into a central account. So it sounds complex, but basically it's balancing cost, acceptance, and the risk component, and helping you to find the right, ideal, optimal setup to increase the acceptance rate as much as possible and to reduce the cost as much as possible. I mean, Ilko, can you bring that to life a little bit? Can you tell us customers who have gone through that thinking process and give an example of how they have come to a conclusion for their setup?
Yeah, definitely. And this is indeed, Thomas, like you mentioned, something we do on a day-to-day basis. Around acceptance, I think there's a lot more knowledge in the market at the moment around what it could mean for your bottom line if you increase acceptance just slightly. So we see a lot of companies in the airlines and travel industry that are actively monitoring this, monitoring different acquiring routes, monitoring different setups to really have a view on, okay, what's the best way to increase acceptance for me whilst reducing or at least keeping cost at a similar level. And in some cases, like I said, those are companies that are doing that themselves, but there are also some companies that are doing that for you. And WorldPay made a recent investment in one of those companies called Bayesian, where you see in one simple overview what the acceptance rate is on all these different acquirer routes or different payment provider routes. On first sight, you might think that is a pretty weird investment for an acquirer, because our natural preference would be that we have everything. But I think it's more a testament to our own capabilities and the fact that we do come out in a lot of cases with better acceptance rate than the rest of the market or our direct competitors. So that's what I usually see in the market, Thomas.
Another component is the acceptance currency. So one of the questions that we had is around currencies and if you get better acceptance rates if you accept the domestic currency. And yes, indeed, one of the surveys that we have done shows that customers are much more likely to convert and buy if they're offered a flight or a holiday in a currency that they understand. They're less worried about the conversion. The value of the trip makes sense to their head, so they don't build in a big buffer to cater for conversion error. So we see huge uptake if you start to offer what we call multi-currency pricing, where you allow the passenger to choose the currency that he wishes to transact in. And of course, that has also an effect on the acceptance rate. So a local transaction with local currency is much more likely to be accepted than a foreign transaction. And also for the cardholder, it incurs less exchange charges to their account. If you have a US dollar card and you purchase something in euro, obviously your bank is going to charge you a conversion rate. If you as an airline offer that passenger to choose his own currency, that will fall away for your traveler.
Yeah, Thomas, sorry if I can just interrupt. There was a question came through asking about conversion rates and how how travel companies can improve the conversion rates at the payment, the checkout end. And one thing you mentioned there was making sure that the payment is taken in local currencies. I mean, are there any other, specific things that can be done at the payment end, other than making it simple to increase that conversion rate?
Are you talking about the conversion of the payment experience?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, kind of this brings up to kind of the summary, and we just reiterate the first part. Kind of the whole point one about the 7 steps really that you can do in that payment journey, and certainly the currency selection is one of those. We did mention that, but it is one of those 7 steps. It's allowing the passenger to choose the right currency, and the other things that we've mentioned is saving card details for later purchases, giving that comfy feeling that your card details are safe, showing the payment methods up front, and then optimizing that payment page itself, and then dealing with fallout if the transaction doesn't go through, dealing with declined transactions, as well as the help that you need to wrap around. And kind of these are kind of the key elements that in addition to the exchange that you can do to increase that conversion rate.
Okay, so I just scuppered your conclusion then by asking that question early.
It introduced the conclusion.
Okay, good.
Let's just and again, point 2 really was to ensure that optimization piece, you extend that through all the channels that you interact with the customer, and there are more and more of those channels coming. Kiosks for airlines, you have payments at a check-in desk, you have onboard retail, and all the social media payments. Ensure that you're aware of Payment Service Directive 2, because that will influence the way you're able to offer these services. On one hand, Payment Service Directive 2 gives more competition in the payment market. You will see more and more bank transfer payments, but on the other hand, there's going to be a lot of regulation around the transaction security. So that will influence the way you will be interacting with the customers. Have mobile in mind. Number 4 was all about the growth of mobile commerce and what that means for the payment method. So we will see a huge, or we've already seen a huge increase in mobile wallets and bank transfers, as we mentioned. And yes, start to home in to your payment setup that you have around risk, acceptance rates, and the card cost, and work with the payment partner to optimize and to align those 3 components to get really the best setup out of your organization. Ilka, do you have any final comments for our listeners?
Oh, besides the fact, thank you for having me in this call, Thomas, and I hope that in case you have any questions at a later stage, please feel free to reach out to us. And looking forward to be part of the next one. Thanks.
Good. Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to keep talking on the conversion rates, because I think it's quite an interesting part of the whole payments process. Is that you need I think I said this to you before. You need a payment process in place for any conversion to happen. I'm quite interested in the basket recovery slide that you had up earlier, and I'm just wondering whether there was any evidence, either qualitative or quantitative, that you could share with us about what's the best way to recover a basket. I mean, is there a messaging tone that works better than others, or I'm just wondering what at that basket recovery stage, when you've spent the money, you've got the customer to agree to buy something, and then because of error 176 the payment doesn't go through, what can be, is there anything that can be done particularly in terms of getting that basket back? Anything that works better than other?
Absolutely. So the first point is leave that basket filled. In a lot of cases, people just return an error, and you have to go back to the beginning, and that's certainly when you're going to lose your customer. So first point, leave that basket full. Enable a recovery process. Second point is be very specific about the error message that you give and differentiate the response depending on the error code that you get from your supplier, from your payment supplier, from your payment provider. Tailor the error message and to be quite descriptive and helpful to some extent, giving the customer hints of what to do. If it's insufficient funds, hint him to look into his bank account and do something about it. Hold the basket for 10, 15 minutes. Enable him to store the basket and come back in 15 minutes. Automatically trigger an SMS or an email from a help center to pick up that shopping basket, or enable somebody to call a help desk with that shopping basket identifier. So enable your support staff to pick up that basket and bring that over the payment line, bring that over the payment hurdle. Enable them to send them a payment link to a website or go through an IVR to voice recognize the payment details so that the passenger can safely and securely pay through an IVR system. Be very proactive and ensure that for every case you have a follow-up working.
Okay, and Ilko, is basket recovery something that's talked about often when you're out and about from customers? I mean, is there a lot of? I'm just wondering. I'm sure there is some evidence out there, but just how much business is lost through baskets unrecovery?
Quite a substantial piece, I would say, and as Thomas hinted already, it's all about communication and managing expectations of your customers. So making sure at the right moment in time you give the right notifications and also provide options along the way. So of course, dropping out of a basket is something that we usually assess in the entire pre-sales process, where we look at the entire payment flow. But equally important for us is the stuff we discussed just now on acceptance rates. So making sure that we have the optimum setup, and whether that's a domestic or an international, or in some cases optimizing the merchant category code or MCC that a specific client is on. Those are all small things that could actually have a massive impact on acceptance, and with that on revenue numbers.
One question I've picked up is about cryptocurrencies. There's a lot of talk about cryptocurrencies, and yes, we do through partners, through exchanges, enable our merchants to accept cryptocurrencies. For us, it's just another form of payment. So if you see them as such, if you like to accept them, do convert them back into a real currency as soon as possible if you don't want to accept that currency risk. But yeah, we're happy to work with them.
Good. Okay. Well, we're just over the hour, so thanks again, both of you. I mean, I think payments is really fascinating, and the deeper we get into it, the more interesting it becomes. And the business critical nature of having an efficient payments process, as I think I said before, has been sort of overlooked, and now it's great that WorldPay and T-News and others are bringing this to the fore. So so Thomas, do you want to conclude again? A conclusion of the conclusion?
Yeah, thank you very much for listening. We'd be more than happy to work with you on those 5 topics, help you to sell more, help you to win more business, be more efficient. And again, looking forward to your calls and to your emails. Thank you very much, Martin, for the invitation.
Okay, that's quite all right. Okay, right. Okay, this is Martin. I'm going to end the webinar now. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining us. Keep an eye on your inbox for the link through to the recording, and hopefully we'll see you all soon again. Thanks very much. Good afternoon.